This year, I know what I'm giving thanks for. My new high score on Candy Crush Saga. Celebrate Thanksgiving with Candy Crush Saga with 3 new missions to celebrate the holiday. There are new in-game challenges lasting all week, and the more missions you complete, the greater the rewards, like color bombs and lollipop hammers. Play Candy Crush Saga now and celebrate your Thanksgiving with them. Download it from the App Store, Google Play, or Windows Store for free. Challenges start November 23rd until November 29th. Terms and conditions apply.
From NJ.com, this is Talk is Cheap, a New York Giants podcast. We're talking Big Blue football all year round.
What's going on, everybody? Zack, Rosenblatt, back here for another episode of the Talk is Cheap podcast. I'm here with Darryl, Slater, as always. There's a lot to cover, so I guess we could get right into it, because the Giants didn't have a game last week, but it was a very eventful bye week, because there's never a dull moment on this beat. The week pretty much started off with, all the news about all these COVID tests. Graham Gano tested positive after the Eagles win. A day after he signed an extension, by the way, so that's tough. he didn't have much time to celebrate. And he's still on the COVID list, unclear if he'll play on Sunday. And then later in the week, they had 3 more guys go on COVID, which were Matt Pert, Caden Smith, and I'm blanking on who the other one was off the top of my head. It was another backup.
Dante Pettis through
Dante Pettis, yeah, who they had just signed and was probably going to make his debut this week. That's not going to happen now because they need at least 10 days, and it happened within 9 days, I believe. So they're going to be out of those guys, which Pert is the main one. Smith plays a lot too, but Pert has been part of that tackle rotation, and now he won't be a part of it. But the big thing that we are going to talk about right here has been kind of taking over the NFL world. Just because of the wild ranges of reporting and the nature of what happened. And it was, I was off last week. The Giants were on a bye. So I tried to take a few days off. And of course, as soon as my first day off happens, news comes through the ticker that Marc Colombo was fired. It felt like it was out of nowhere, as we've reported and as others have reported as time has gone on. It wasn't out of nowhere. Something that has been brewing for a while, but it culminated in, as many have reported, Joe Judge wanted to bring in Dave DiGuglielmo. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. You're gonna have to correct me on that. But they were gonna bring him in as a consultant to help Marc Colombo coach the offensive line. Essentially, Marc Colombo did not take kindly to that, and he let Joe know about it in the form of using some curse words. There was a report that they got into a fight, which immediately sounded fake, especially considering who reported it. I won't say his name, but that turned out to be unfounded. I mean, if Marc Colombo, 6'8", 330-pound NFL offensive lineman, had punched Joe Judge in the face, Joe Judge would not have been available for press conferences this week, I would say. But the fight didn't happen. Marc Colombo was fired. There's been a lot of stuff coming out about how they had disagreements about that rotation, which we've talked about is very strange. Never seen that before. Colombo wanted the same 5. There was an incident in practice a few weeks ago where Joe Judge interrupted Marc Colombo to show Nick Gates some form of technique, and Marc Colombo did not take kindly to that. There's been a lot, I've talked to people who said that Marc Colombo kind of thought he was being scapegoated for how bad the offensive line was in the beginning of the year. There's just a lot going on here. In the end, though, this is a very abnormal thing to happen in the middle of the season, where you fire a position coach, especially as important on the offensive line, and you bring in an outside person to do the job. Normally it would be someone internally you promote. But the fact that they hired somebody from outside who hasn't been around these guys at all surprised me. But you were covering this more than I was. But what were you thinking when all this is going down, and what are you thinking now that we've had a week to think about it?
Well, I guess if you start from the beginning, obviously their line had been struggling from the get-go, right? I mean, this is a line with a lot of issues, partly talent, right? They have some guys in some spots who are not long-term solutions. And then they have a guy. Well, you talk about Nick Gates. He's probably not a very good center. Okay, no matter who's coaching him. And then you have a guy on the opposite end of that at the left tackle spot in Andrew Thomas, who they hope can be the future, who has stunk. I mean, you can sugarcoat it however you want. He's been better lately. He's been bad, and the line's been better lately. Okay, but for the most part, it's been bad. All right, so you kind of get that, and you kind of get why Joe Judge would not kind of you do get it, and why Joe Judge would want to take an increased interest in the line. If you look at it from Colombo's perspective, I mean, you have a head coach who's had an entirely special teams background, who has no background in offensive line coaching. And I guess in that situation, it comes across as meddling. So there's a lot of things we still kind of don't know about this situation. Obviously, we know what happened when it reached the boiling point, and if you say what Marc Colombo said to your boss in any line of work, you're going to get fired. I mean, I don't think that's any great, enormous revelation that would happen in any line of work, and even in the NFL. Now or 15 years ago. I think this is something if you MF your boss, for lack of a better term, to his face, you're going to get fired. Okay. So, but did it have to reach this point? And I think that's the more interesting part of this conversation. And we talked to some guys this week for a broader story about this issue, and one of them is a former NFL coach. I talked to him. He said, he was kind of speculating on it. He didn't really know, but he was saying in these situations, and he used to be a head coach, and he said, when I had a problem with an assistant coach with the way he was doing something on the practice field in terms of teaching or whatever, I would bring it up with him privately before we hit the practice field. Like we don't know whether Joe Judge did that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of the issue here.
Right.
Yeah.
So did he go to Marc Colombo and say, "Listen, man, I think we need to adjust how we do this," or did he bring it up for the first time on the practice field in front of the players and basically pants this guy in front of his players and undercut him? We don't know. Okay, so let's just put those two scenarios out there. There's one or two ways it could have gone down, and I think this former NFL head coach and everyone would agree, who manages people even for a living in any business, that there's one way to do it right and there's one way to do it wrong. We don't know whether Joe Judge talked to Colombo about this and then he saw it continuing on the field and then he interrupted. That could have happened. But if he brought this up, I think, for the first time on the field and hadn't brought this up with the coach behind closed doors, I think that's a problem. And that's not me saying that. That's a former NFL head coach saying that you don't do that. You have to bring things up with guys behind the scenes first. So there's a lot of layers to this, a lot of possibilities for the whys and hows of it reaching the boiling point. But I think we can all agree that the boiling point that it reached, which wasn't physical, but was still unacceptable. Like, you can't do what Marc Colombo did and expect to keep your job, whether your line's playing great or whether your line's playing poorly. Does Marc Colombo deserve a lot of blame for the Giants line playing poorly? I think he deserves maybe some. You're not talking about a guy who's been a line coach for 20 years. He's relatively new to this job. He'd been with the Cowboys,
I think he was the offensive line coach for like 1.5 years, 2 years, something like that.
Right, because he was the assistant line coach.
One of the interesting thing is he replaced Paul Alexander during the season, and Paul Alexander trained Andrew Thomas before this season. Like a funny connection there. Yeah.
And that's the world of line coaching is I don't know, I guess incestuous wouldn't be the right word. It's a weird word to use. But these guys cross paths. I mean, we've talked to Duke Manyweather. He trains a lot of these guys. So there's a lot of cross pollination would be the more accurate word of who these guys work with. And so I think the coaches with these NFL teams understand that these guys work with guys before the draft and they work with other guys during the offseason. So the bottom line is the line is bad. I think if the line is going to be really bad, if this line is going to be really, really bad, then they're going to be really bad no matter who coaches them. And they're going to be really bad because Dave Gettleman did a poor job of picking players. That's why they will be bad. Not because like one guy is a terrible O-line coach. Like Marc Colombo is not clueless.
Yeah. He's actually pretty smart, I think, honestly.
So it's a combination of factors. Like I think, but the end result had to be the end result when it reached that boiling point. Now, did it have to reach that boiling point? Could Joe Judge, as a rookie head coach, done a better job of managing a situation? That's something we really, I don't think, have seen in some of the reporting coming out about this. Is could this have been avoided through different sort of people management, or was Marc Colombo just so unwilling to accept critiquing and criticism and possible outside help that this was always going to be the end result? Because honestly, just because Joe Judge wanted to bring in Dave DeGuglielmo, and I think I said it right, as a consultant, that's okay. Look, that's his right as the head coach. And DeGuglielmo has got a ton of experience. And if you're Colombo and you're just saying, heck no, I'm not. Okay, well, look, man, like, quite frankly, Colombo hasn't really earned the right to not have that type of help, considering how poorly the Lions played and the fact that he doesn't have a lot of experience. So was it Colombo being super, super stubborn and Judge wasn't at fault at all? I find that hard to believe. I honestly think that as a rookie head coach, he may have kind of overstepped a little bit here, and not perhaps handled it correctly. I just don't know why Colombo would get so angry for no good reason if this was handled on a total human to human level in the most optimum way possible from Judge's angle. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, well, and I think it's important to be said, and we can talk about this, like about what this means going forward. I think there's a few different like takeaways I have from what you were saying, but Colombo is not like a Judge. They don't have a background. Like
Yes.
Colombo is here because of Jason Garrett, not because of Joe Judge. Joe Judge hired him, and they interviewed DiGuglielmo, by the way, before hiring Colombo. Who knows like how much Judge took Garrett's input here because it's his offense. Whatever, he spoke really highly of Colombo. Colombo is really highly thought of around the league, I think, because of the work he did in Dallas. Former NFL offensive lineman. I think it should be said that he was extremely popular amongst the players, which that's not necessarily a good or bad thing. Sometimes that can be a bad thing. Sometimes it can be good because, he's a straight shooter type of guy, former NFL offensive lineman. I think he was really well liked in there. But yeah, I think the factor of Joe Judge wanting his guys on the staff and on the team, I think you're seeing like Joe Judge will stop at nothing to establish what he sees as the right culture and the right, personality of his team, his way or the highway. He's proven that if you get in his doghouse, it's a bad thing. Golden Tate got in there, and I don't know if he's necessarily gotten out. He played less than 50% of the snaps when he got back last week. Colombo's out of here. Guys run laps, whatever. And so that this is just like you wrote about this in the aftermath, and I think it's a fair question. And I think Jason Lockenford reported about it being an actual thing. Like, I wonder what this means for the future of Jason Garrett on this team. If they miss the playoffs, or even if they don't miss the playoffs and the offense just keeps, they've won 2 games in a row, but it's not like their offense has been gangbusters still. Their running game has gotten better. They're still not scoring a lot. Right. They're one of the least worst scoring teams in the NFL. It's debate. Daniel Jones has played 2 good games, but that shouldn't eliminate all of his other bad games. Like, we need to see how he plays over the last 6 games. So, like, is Jason Garrett going to be here next year? Or are other guys that weren't, Joe Judge disciples going to be here? And I think, it's going to be very interesting because on one hand, you'd like to have some continuity for Daniel Jones. It would be his 3rd offense in 3 years if they hired from outside the building. And that's just not, historically, if you look at quarterbacks who have had to deal with that, they don't succeed most of the time. And so you understand like that would be a bad thing. But on the other hand, if you don't think Jason Garrett's the right fit here and you don't think his offense is creative enough and, it's not, aggressive enough, and which, there are signs of all of that being true, even if Garrett's done better the last couple of weeks, then you probably should move on from him at the same time. And it just kind of goes back to, like, I wonder how much Colombo ties into that because Garrett recommended him and, is it going to be held against him that Colombo did this and this? And, it's just, there's just like so many interesting things. And I think it's also important to like point out that even if the offensive line comes out and is really good over the next few weeks, and I don't know if that necessarily should be attributed to this coaching change. I think it's a product. If this offensive line keeps getting better, it's a product of a group that didn't have a preseason together. They have a rookie at left tackle, a converted tackle at center, Cam Fleming at right tackle. Shane Lemieux's playing a lot. He's a rookie. Like, it's a product of them playing together for the first time, and they are getting time to do it. And Marc Colombo, maybe he's the reason they're here, maybe he's not. But the DiGuglielmo element is also kind of interesting, just because like if you look at his history, like he has, like you mentioned, he's been at a lot of stops. He was at the Patriots. He started his coaching career on Coughlin's staff. He was an offensive line assistant to the offensive line coach. But he's bounced around for a reason. He's known for having like a brash personality. I think there are some players who love playing for him. I think there are some that he rubs the wrong way. And I'm curious to see like how that could impact an offensive line group that, those guys obviously are really tight knit. And if he comes in and rubs them the wrong way and, barks at them, and it's this big personality you're bringing in week 11 or week 12 that they've never even met before, most likely, besides Fleming probably. What do you make of the DiGuglielmo element of this?
Yeah, obviously a guy who has ties to Joe Judge from New England, and he's had mixed results. He went and replaced Dante Scarnecchia in New England, and that didn't last. Years ago with the Jets, he replaced Bill Callahan, very notable offensive line coach, and was certainly like very publicly fiery, and I was not covering the Jets back then. This was 2012, the year before I started covering the Jets. I was working in a different job, and he gave a legendary press conference where he was barking about, I'm not afraid of the ghost of Bill Callahan or something like that, and and just he's just very, very proud guy and very bombastic and combustible to some degree. So I will be curious to see how this works as well. I'm sure Colombo is not a wallflower. That's so.
Yeah,
Most of these offensive line coaches aren't.
Yeah, offensive linemen are a different breed, that's for sure.
There's a couple of factors here. I mean, obviously, they're not going to come in and overhaul everything. Like Dave DeGuglielmo is going to have to adhere to what Jason Garrett's doing offensively. Like they're not going to change their whole offense based on who the new line coach is.
Yeah.
So I don't see, maybe he tweaks some little techniques here and there, but like the notion that he's going to totally change the blocking scheme, I don't, that's not happening. It just can't. It's such a too integral part of the offense. I mean, I'm not a football guy, if you will, but anyway, that's common sense. That's that's an inherent part of your offense. It's not something you bring in an offensive line coach and totally change, going from, say, a man blocking scheme to a zone blocking scheme or whatever. We don't need to get into all that boring X's and O's stuff. But I think there will be surely some small tweaks, and Joe Judge downplayed the adjustments. Of course he did. He's gonna. What do you expect? I mean, his Zoom calls are totally, quite frankly, pointless for us because he just goes on there and spins, which like most of these coaches do. But yeah, he acknowledged even in that context that there would be some tweaks, and whether he yells at these guys a lot, I don't know if that will be a huge factor in these guys be saying like, oh, the heck with this or whatever. You have a lot of guys in that line who are playing for jobs. Will Hernandez, Kevin Zeitler, Nick Gates, all playing for whether they will or won't be here next year. Cam Fleming. So they're motivated regardless of what the record is, I think, and regardless of who the coach is. But the bottom line is either you can play or you can't. Like, I just don't buy this idea that a great offensive line coach is going to turn an untalented player into a productive one. No, sorry. I don't think that's true. I really don't. You're good. I think it helps, but either you have it or you don't. And we'll see. We'll see. I think it's clear some of these guys on this line don't have it, and they're not long-term solutions. But the big one being Andrew Thomas. It's not like they're going to give up on him after a year. What do they do there? Are you going to see an uptick in the production? You've seen a little bit, but if you're really honest about it and you look at the Pro Football Focus grades, yeah, he's played a little better, okay? But the bar was so low that it's not like he's lighting it up now. Like, if you legitimately want to be honest about it and not have like blinders on about who this guy is, he hasn't been productive, period. So we'll see.
And one interesting thing about DeGuglielmo, just last year, he replaced somebody after things that already started. Like 5 days into Dolphins training camp, they fired their offensive line coach and replaced him with Dave. And then Brian Flores didn't want to bring him back next year still. So it's another, like, who knows if he'll be their offensive line coach. He's doing a tryout, really. Like, these 6 games are a tryout for him as much as the players.
Yeah,
really.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess we can put a bow on that.
And especially if there's a new OC next year, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
say Judge says, oh, we're done with Garrett. Well, he's not going to say to the new OC, oh, by the way, you have to keep this O-line coach who I know from New England. I'm sure he's not. I wouldn't think he would, right? So if it's a new OC, it's probably mostly a clean slate offensively anyway, in terms of the lower level staff, in terms of the position coaches, I should say.
Yep, I think that's fair. And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised whether it's Garrett or not if Judge makes a few coaching changes. He seems like someone who's not going to, sit idly by if things aren't going well at certain positions. And there's certainly some positions that haven't played well if you look at this team. So,
yeah,
this offseason
can be a good thing and a bad thing, right? I mean, you got to be decisive, but I think I talked to the same coach I was referring to earlier. You got to be bold, and you can't wait around for make decisions as a head coach is what he said, but you don't want to jump at it. You don't want to be, there's that line in any type of management role. You don't want to be overzealous. So we'll see where he falls. I mean, this is a guy who's 10 games in to this thing, so we're learning a lot about him as we go.
Yep. All right, we can start spinning a forward. I'm sure this topic won't go away just because of the nature of, every week the offensive line is going to be almost watched more. They're going to be scrutinized more based on how they play now. But Yeah, looking ahead, I think over the last week, I can't remember if we talked about this last week in time or not, but the Giants are getting closer to getting back Xavier McKinney and O'Shane Ximenez and linebacker Tate Crowder. But McKinney's the main one I think is worth talking about. This defense has played much better than anybody could.
Can't swatch in store? Finding your perfect foundation match is basically impossible right now. That's why Il Maquillage's online quiz is such a game changer. It finds your perfect match in seconds from the comfort of your own home. And it gets even better. With Try Before You Buy, you can try your full-size shade at home free for 14 days. So convenient in times like these. Take the quiz at ilmaquillage.com/quiz. That's ILMAKIAGE.com/quiz.
I would expect it. They're in the middle of the league in most categories. They're elite at run stopping. And Xavier McKinney, when they drafted him, they talked about him being the quarterback of the defense. They had plans for him to be like a centerpiece of this defense as a rookie. Then he fractured his foot in training camp and he hasn't played a single game. I think fans' expectations maybe have gotten a little high for a guy that hasn't, fully practiced in a long. I think he fully practiced today actually, but in all season pretty much he hasn't played an NFL game. He basically didn't have training camp. If you factor in all the time he missed. But at the same time, he could be like a fun, injection into the depth chart at safety. I would think he would be the third safety. They signed Logan Ryan to replace him, and Logan Ryan's been fine. Jabril Peppers has played pretty well lately. What do you think about Xavier possibly getting back into the mix? I know fans are pretty excited.
Yeah. I'm not going to do the Xavier Savior pun, but I literally just thought of that. Because I was about to say it. Not even the pun, but I was about to say something about him potentially being the savior of the secondary, but then the rhyming deterred me, or maybe it didn't. I don't know. But I don't like the notion that this guy's going to come in and be a massive difference maker is crazy. I mean, if anything, this is great for him personally because he's able to, get his feet wet a little bit in the NFL. The Giants are able to learn a little bit about him, but more importantly, he's able to learn a little bit about playing at this level, at this speed, in this system. Presuming Patrick Graham's back next year, and he probably will be. I don't think he'll get a head coaching job. I don't think he get fired, but so this is a good learning opportunity for him. I think that's how people should look at it. I don't think they should look at it and think, oh, this guy's an immediate upgrade. He's going to be Ed Reed going out there immediately. Like you said, Logan Ryan's been fine, and I think the best approach, and you kind of wrote about this, is work Xavier McKinney in whenever he returns to the game field as third safety. Give him some reps here and there. It's not a situation where he's going to replace Logan Ryan wholesale as a starting free safety. So, yeah, and you got to remember Logan Ryan's not a guy who was a natural free safety necessarily anyway. This is a kind of a new transition position for him and too. But he's got a ton of experience, and Xavier McKinney can learn from Logan Ryan. I think it's a good thing for him. I mean, if this kid had started from the get-go and he had been able to be out there from week one, gone through training camp, not been hurt at all, I think you could look at a situation where you say, wow, he really helped the defense this year in a big way, was a big factor. I think you almost have to flip that on its head now. I think him being on the defense in whatever role he plays is more so going to help him because 6 weeks left in the season, maybe the playoffs, I guess. It's not a situation, I don't think, where he's going to come in and be this incredible difference maker. Work him in slowly. They don't want to have a re-injury situation, and a guy who hasn't been out there that much, you could pull a muscle or something like that, right? Because of how inactive he literally has been because of his foot. So, that was an unfortunate deal for him and the Giants, but I think this is great for him. I think he's a fascinating player. It'll add another kind of I was going to say X factor. That's just another stupid pun, but I think it'll add a little bit of a spark to the final 6 games, right? Won't it? Okay, cool. Here's an unknown factor. Let's see what he's got, right?
Yeah, well, speaking of all your puns, when they announced that McKinney and Ximenez are coming back, everybody was referring to them as the X-Men.
Oh,
and I know you're a big comic book fan, Darryl. So
yeah,
superhero movies are your favorite, and all about them. And
something like that.
I'm being sarcastic. Darryl is a loser. He does not like all that stuff. Anyway, but yeah, so I would say, yeah, I agree. I think the ceiling for him for the rest of the season would probably just be that he's the third safety that rotates in every now and then, and you kind of give him a spell. Maybe if, they're probably still going to be in it until the last week just because of the nature of this crappy division, which we'll talk about in a second. But, if it's week 17 and they're out of the playoff picture, maybe you play them a lot more because that's when you should start playing all these young guys and look ahead to next year. But it's certainly good that they're getting these. Zimonez, I don't think he was playing particularly well before he got hurt, but he's probably better than the guys they're starting opposite Kyler Fackrell right now. Tay Crowder was showing some flashes for a 7th-round pick before he got hurt, and he'll probably be back. So you can feel a little better about like some of those weak spots in the defense, I guess. And maybe Ryan Lewis comes back and is an upgrade over Isaac Yiadom, whatever that means. But yeah, so we should talk about this NFC East race. We've talked about it almost every week, and it keeps getting weirder. I feel like every week we're in week 12, and all 4 teams have 3 wins, which is just unreal. I looked it up on Pro Football Reference, and I think since 1920, I forget what the exact number was. It was something like 300 something or 400 something teams have started either 3-7 or 3-6-1, which the Eagles are, and only one of those 400 teams or whatever has made the playoffs, and that was like the Falcons. I forget what year it was. Or maybe it was the Panthers. The point being that history is going to be altered this year because one of these 4 teams, unfortunately, has to make the playoffs. There's legit scenarios where the champion could have 5 wins. The mediocrity in this division is just phenomenal. If you just look at how bad the Eagles are, they got beat by the Browns in like embarrassing fashion the other day. Carson Wentz looks like the worst quarterback in the NFL, and they're still in first place. And like I tweeted about this the other day, like just to highlight how insane this division is. So Washington and Dallas play on Thursday. If Washington wins on Thursday, they're in first place. If the Giants win on Sunday, they take first place because they have tiebreaker over Washington. Then if the Eagles win on Monday, they take first place because they have the tiebreaker because they have a tie in their record. So we could have 3 different division leaders over the span of like 4 days.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, the division right now, I saw this Pro Football Talk crunch these numbers, and I guess you don't really have to do much number crunching, but so the worst ever division is 2008 NFC West in terms of combined record, final record, and and winning percentage also is how you compare the 2 divisions at this point. But the current NFC East has the worst winning percentage. I want to say 313 is the winning percentage, and the other one was like 340 in the 340s. So they're on pace to be the worst division in the history of. I don't know how far back that goes. I know that obviously the division's changed at certain times, but it's a fairly long history. So, yeah. So 6-10, right, is what the Giants. Maybe
probably
5.
Need to be. Yeah. I would say if the Giants are going to make it, they probably have to win 6. Yeah.
Because if the Eagles win 6, then it's really 6.5 wins for the Eagles. Yep. So you got to think if the Eagles win 5 and the Giants win 5, then again 5.5. So say the Giants got to get to 6 games left. They got to close 3-3. They play the Bengals, who they should win this game on Sunday. If they don't, you should just put them in the toaster. Season over. And then you have Cowboys end of the year. But in between, you have some challenges there. The Giants are going to have to quote unquote steal one of these games, right?
Yeah. I mean, you look at that schedule. You look at they have the Seahawks on the road.
Yep.
They have the Cardinals at home, the Browns at home, and the Ravens on the road.
So the big ones are Cardinals, Browns.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, you could say that the Seahawks have really bad defense, but it's not like the Giants' offense has been gangbusters. So that they have Russell Wilson and DK Metcalf and all those guys. But yeah, they need to steal, as you said, one of those games. And I think they also need things to go their way. They need the Eagles to keep being a dumpster fire.
Yes.
And they need the Cowboys. The Cowboys have the easiest slate of this group. They have a couple of teams that aren't playoff teams on their schedule, which is more than can be said for the Eagles or the Giants. Washington has not an insane schedule, but the Giants have the tiebreaker on Washington. So you're not really scared of Washington unless they somehow become 2 games ahead of the Giants. So you're really only focused on, the Eagles and the Cowboys. I think the Eagles are just going to tumble to the end. Their schedule is like impossible coming up.
You had a good point on that.
Cowboys so that's what the team. I think the Cowboys are the team. I'll pull up their schedule now.
I got it right here. Their schedule, they're Washington at home, obviously, on Thursday in the Thanksgiving game, the second and now final Thanksgiving game because of the night game got whacked.
Yeah.
So they go versus Washington, then at Baltimore, tough one, at Cincinnati, not so tough, versus the 49ers, not so tough, versus the Eagles, not so tough, and at the Giants, also not very tough. So the final 4 games for the Cowboys, Bengals, Niners, Eagles, Giants, if you just look at the opponents, and then if they beat Washington, here, I guess we're talking Wednesday. If they beat them tomorrow on Thursday, then yeah, I think you could be in a situation where, and I guess we could publish this podcast tomorrow now, so what we're talking about is not totally irrelevant.
We're publishing it on Wednesday. Don't worry.
Yeah, it'll come out later today. But yeah, that's a huge game, right? That's a big time driver's seat game. Considering I did not realize what the final 4 games for the Cowboys look like. Bengals, Niners, Eagles, Giants. I mean,
yeah. So what I wrote about, like you mentioned,
and Andy Dalton's back.
Andy Dalton's back. They beat the Vikings, who had won 3 in a row leading up to that game. Their defense is awful. Like every game they win is going to have to be like 30-38. I mean, like 30-28. I mean, like they beside, I think they give up the most points of anybody in the NFL actually. But they have Andy Dalton. They have all those weapons on offense. As of now, they beat the Giants earlier this season, so they would have the tiebreaker going into Week 17. So that I mean, it ultimately the division might come down to that game. To be honest with you, it wouldn't surprise me if it did. And the Cowboys have more players that are experienced in winning. They have this offense. They have the easier schedule. Like all the side, like they have been a mess most of the year, and they won one game, and all of a sudden everybody's talking about it like they turned it around. Nobody in this division has actually turned it around. It's just relative to the rest of the division. And I wrote about this in something that hasn't come out yet. Like if the Giants are 3-7 in any other division, we're talking about 2021 right now. We're not talking about, their division race, but they're in the NFC East and you can only play who your opponents are and what division you're in. So yeah, so I would say the Cowboys are the team that scares me more than the other two. Washington might have the most talent just because they probably have the best defense in the division, but like none of these quarterbacks, I would say you could like have 100% confidence in. That's for sure. So like there's just no way of predicting this division how it's going to go. Like the Eagles, for how bad they've been, if they just win another game, they're in the driver's seat. So like it's that simple. Whoever of these teams win against non-division teams is probably going to win this division ultimately.
Yeah, I mean that's what it'll come down to. So there you go. So you watch at 12:30, Giants fans on Thanksgiving, and should say 4:30.
Yeah, Giants fans should be rooting for Washington on Thursday. That's for sure.
There you go.
We can briefly touch on this game against the Bengals. I should say, they're not going to have Joe Burrow, who unfortunately suffered like a scary knee injury. It was gross. He got hit pretty bad on it, and it stinks because I was excited to watch him. He's a really fun player. He's been great as a rookie. He's going to be out for at least a year. It sounded like he tore multiple ligaments in his knee. So he's out. So they're going to be playing Brandon Allen, I believe, is who they're going to play.
Yeah.
At quarterback, they don't have Joe Mixon. Their offensive line is terrible. Their defense is terrible. Like by every stretch, if the Giants lose this game, like you said, like technically they'll still be in it till the end, and they'll keep saying that. But if they can't beat the Bengals in this condition, then they're not going to beat any of those 4 teams that we mentioned, and then that would leave you without a win until the Cowboys or whatever. Like it's weird to say that they're Giants fans have to enjoy that. They're playing a big game in late November, which hasn't happened in a long time. It's probably it might be the most important game since that playoff year 4 years ago. Like is that a fair argument that this is their most important game since then? Yeah. So, I mean, if they win, they're in pretty good shape. They're not out of the woods yet. Like we said, they'll have to win another one. But I don't see any. I shouldn't say I don't see any way. You never know with this team, but I would expect them to win on Sunday, and it would be nice for them to win in convincing fashion, both for us and for their sake.
Yes, for sure. For a deadline.
Tired of these. I know they're exciting, but I'm tired of these late fourth quarter. Everything's close. Final drive. The story I have ready to go might change completely. Like it's inside baseball a little bit in terms of sports writing, but like when you're deadline writing, it was especially different. You were to work for newspapers too. Like deadline writing on especially for late games when you worked for a newspaper, when it was close at the end, was the most stressful possible thing because you're at the will of the gods, and if things go the opposite way of what you wrote, then you're in a lot of trouble, and you have to kind of. And anyway, the Giants have had a lot of games like that this year, and it's been stressful. And it would be nice if they could blow somebody out.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure they feel the same way. So it's in Brandon Allen. I was funny. We were talking about. He's the quarterback now for the Bengals. They just promoted from the practice squad. I hadn't heard about him or thought about him in a long time. This guy's 28, and he was 6th round pick in 2016.
Played for Brett Bielema at Arkansas.
He did. Yep, exactly. 6th-round pick by the Jaguars, 2016 out of Arkansas. Dude's 28. And then I'm looking down. So he's only played in 3 games ever, and he started them all. And it was last year in Denver, and he went 1-2. So, yeah. I mean, Ryan Finley was drafted ahead of Joe Burrow. Not ahead of him, but year previous, I guess, or 2 years previous. And they decided, the Bengals did, to not go with Ryan Finley as their quarterback for this game, but instead Brandon Allen. So there is, again, if it was Ryan Finley or Brandon Allen or Brandon Finley or Allen Ryan or whatever, whoever it is, there's no reason the Giants should lose this game. If they lose this game, we're going to learn one thing about them. They're not good enough to win the NFC East. They still might actually win the NFC East, though. I mean, but they certainly would put themselves big time behind the 8 ball with a loss here. No excuses. They can't win. They can't lose.
That's kind of the thing we have to couch with, because we were convinced they were toast, obviously, when they were 0-5 and they were 1-7. Like, there's no reason to think a 1-7 team is going to turn things around. And then all of a sudden, everybody's talking about the Giants like they're the resurgent NFL team and Joe Judge a coach of the year or something. Like, I think we all need to take a step back and breathe.
Pump the brakes. They beat 2 bad teams.
They've only beaten the Eagles in Washington this year.
They're also a bad team, so I get it, But I think this is very premature. Again,
I understand the positivity, by the way. They've been competitive. The Giants have been awful for years. Like, you want to hang your hat on something. I think Joe Judge is steering in the right direction, all that stuff, but they're still 3-7. Like, they're not a Super Bowl contender. Like,
I can understand fans having that outlook, but it just seems like in some circles, the way it's been written about has been so definitively
positive,
and with no recognition of a gray area here of the reality of their situation. So look, go beat the Bengals on Sunday, take care of business. I think you get credit for that win for sure. No one's going to sit around and say, I guess, so what, I guess, kind of, but you do what you're supposed to do. That's part of being a good team, is beating teams you're supposed to beat. Look, a lot of good teams rack up wins with your 13-3 team. You're going to beat some bad teams, and no one's going to say, oh, geez, you won 13 games. 4 or 5 of those don't count because they were bad teams. No, you have to stack these type of wins. And so that's part of building a winning team, is being able to go into a game that you should win, and kind of not overlook it. Not that they would necessarily, I don't think, in this case. And pound a team into the dirt, basically, is what they have to do in this game. Make it a little easier on themselves than they have been.
Yeah, making it easier on themselves is not the Giants' way for a long time. It's been for a long time. But it'd be cool. On one hand, it'd be cool for Giants fans if they could get to the playoffs. Whether they're sick, Giants fans aren't going to care if they're 6-10 and in the playoffs. Playoffs are the playoffs. No. But on the other hand, it kind of stinks that they won't be able to. Like, there's no chance they're going to be open in the stadium to fans this year. They've already taken that privilege away from a lot of teams. So they would have a home playoff game with no fans at MetLife, which is just so. It's kind of depressing while also being exciting. But it sums up 2020 in a nutshell, really.
It does. And it would be very 2022 if they won the division at 6-10, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And then, everybody always says once you're in the playoffs, all bets are off, I guess. But hey, maybe we'll be covering a playoff game in 2021. It would be in 2021, I think. So there you go. The year would be over by then. This miserable year. All right, we can wrap up on that note.
Who do you got in the game? Who are you picking?
Oh yeah, I should say. I'm gonna pick. I will pick the Giants, and I'll have them winning probably by a touchdown, I would say.
I have Bengals 21, Giants 20 for no reason other than I just want to be a jerk. So
you are a jerk. I can't.
I am. I want to be, and I am. I achieved the goal. But look, I'll take it to the bank. I think that
don't bet your house on DraftKings.
Don't do that. I think the Giants. There's probably a 65% chance they win the game. I'm just trying to be a little bit of a contrarian there. So I think they will win the game, even though I'm just making a kind of outside the box pick there at 21-20. If the Bengals do win, I think that's maybe a reasonable score, 17-14, something like that. It's not like the Bengals are going to beat them 38 to 3.
These aren't offenses that are going to be scoring 35 points most likely.
Probably a low scoring game, especially on the Bengals side of things with Peter Allen or whatever his name is at quarterback. So
We should just change his name every time we say it.
Yeah, right.
Tom Allen is up on Sunday, and all right. We'll wrap up on that. We'll wrap up on that note. I should say, by the time you guys listen to this, it might be Thanksgiving. So happy Thanksgiving. Hope you guys have a great time with your families.
Definitely.
We'll get back to you again next week. Maybe the Giants will still be in the thick of this race. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Acast recommends more podcasts, more episodes, more great shows. Keep listening to hear a new show we recommend.
Welcome to Red Flags, a post-true crime boom true crime podcast from ID, where we explore the complex truths behind the warning signs.
I'm Karina Michelle, an armchair detective with a sociology degree to back it up.
And I'm Tori Telfer, a true crime writer fascinated by what happens after the crime, how pop culture digests it, gets it right, gets it wrong.
We'll be your weekly one-stop shop for all things true crime.
Listen and subscribe to Red Flags from Investigation Discovery on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your true crime fix.
Acast recommends.